Okay, hello class. Sorry again that the broadcast on Thursday didn't work. I was trying to I tried to get access to a wired connection at the Air Canada Business Lounge, but they just would not take my money for some reason. I had to go wireless, and obviously that didn't prove to be effective. So I guess we're ahead of the curve a little bit with the technology, which is okay. We're trying to push the limits. But hopefully I can make up for it with this video recording that you guys can watch at your leisure. I'm gonna kind of redo what I did on Thursday just in case people missed out on things. But before we get into that, I just wanted to maybe take a look at some of the assignments from the last assignment 4 with the JavaScript or the layout. Actually, let's look at assignment 3 because I haven't marked assignment 4 yet. But let's have a look. So a lot of the websites that I liked, at least most people were able to get the functionality down pretty well. But some of you did pretty well on the design side as well. So here's one that I liked. Pretty straightforward and simple. I like the simplicity of it. It's consistent. See all the pages? It looks the same. We have a nice little navigation bar here. So pretty nice design and layout. So that was one example of one of the better examples of some good styling. Let's have a look at some other ones here. Yeah, this one here I really liked. So this is Janet Lamb's, and again, very simple layout, sort of a top-down approach, just a single column approach, which seems to be a pretty popular design at this point. A lot of websites are going that way, just sort of a single column design. So again, nice consistent design throughout the page. Simple yet effective, right? It's not too complex. There's not a ton here really, but it's simple enough and it's put together well enough that it's really starting to look. These are really starting to look like some real web pages here. Okay, so I think it's good that you guys have a look at your students, your colleagues' web pages just to see what other people are doing. So those are just a couple of examples that I wanted to show you guys. Okay, so let's get started on talking about jQuery. So like I said last week, jQuery is JavaScript. Okay, so don't be too afraid. It's just like I said. Hopefully you may have heard me on Thursday, but I said in computers in general, the secret to allowing human beings to understand something that's as complex as, say, a modern computer. In order to do that, we have to have layers of abstraction, right? Because a computer at its core, as we discussed before, is dealing with ones and zeros, millions of ones and zeros. And obviously human beings, there are some people with a lot of mental effort can make sense of this stuff, but there's only a few. And so, this is how computers started off in let's say, the 1940s and 50s. The people were actually, they had their hands on the lowest part of the computer. But eventually people got tired dealing with that level of abstraction because you're concentrating on the details, the nitty-gritty, rather than developing an application, which is what you really want to focus on, right? So what they did is they put a layer of abstraction over top of those ones and zeros. And what that was called assembler language. So instead of dealing with ones and zeros, you have small little commands like, move this bit of memory over to this bit of memory, or add whatever in this register, add it to the value of this other register. So even though it was a layer of abstraction, it was still difficult to really understand what was going on. And so again, they put another layer of abstraction on top of assembler code. And that was, so the C language, you may have heard of C, the programming language C before. That was, again, another layer up, right? And then even people got frustrated with C because even it worked at a level of detail that a lot of human beings just aren't good at dealing with. And again, you want to focus on building your application, not dealing with bits, right? Moving data around. That's not really what we're after. And so they've built another layer on top of that, right? So higher level languages like C# and Java. And it seems we've sort of, at least with programming, we've reached sort of a level where the abstraction seems to be at a good spot. So, because as you go up in abstractions, you lose detail, but you gain power. And it's it's the opposite when you go the other way. You increase the detail, but you lose the power. So it takes longer to do simple things. Okay, so let's take a look. For example, a car. We could look at it the same way. A car has many levels of abstraction. At the highest level, people really understand the car as a steering wheel, pedals, and wheels, right? But we could go lower than that. We could look at, you know, the drivetrain, the fuel system, the air conditioning system. That's a lower level of abstraction. Then we could look, you know, even with a lower level than that, we could start looking at the wires and the tubes and bolts and things. And then we could even go further down. We could look at the molecules inside the bolts, the molecules inside the wires, and then even further down we could look at the atoms. But obviously that level of abstraction is too far below for a user, certainly, right? When you get in a car, you're not thinking about the atoms that make up your car. Just like when you use a computer program, you're not thinking about the ones and zeros. You're thinking about utilizing your application. So that's a key aspect. This abstraction is a key aspect of computer technology. Okay, so jQuery is a higher level of abstraction that abstracts away the more complex things that we do in JavaScript, because JavaScript can get pretty, you know, when you want to again focus on building applications, JavaScript can get somewhat difficult. So for example, remember when we looked at last week, when we looked at form validation, and we had a really long string. So for example here, remember we did this var x document dot forms my form f name value. So that's quite a lot of, so all we're really trying to get is the value in our form field, right? And that's a lot to write. So what jQuery has done is put a level of abstraction over top of JavaScript. So as the web developer, you can focus more on the application development rather than dealing with the nitty-gritty. So back to the car methodology, you can now deal with turning the wheel and pressing the gas pedal rather than thinking, oh, okay, I have to, you know, some fuel needs to go in the engine now and the pistons are going to go up and down. That's too, for a user, that level is too low. We prefer to work at a higher level because then you can focus on driving, right, rather than focusing on how the car works. Okay, so hopefully that metaphor works for you. So let's take a look at jQuery and what exactly is jQuery. Okay, so again, jQuery is JavaScript. It's a JavaScript library. So some people have just written lots and lots of JavaScript that creates this library that allows you to access JavaScript from a higher level of abstraction, right? So what jQuery does is it really simplifies JavaScript programming for you. A lot of stuff that, you know, you would really need to understand programming, and you'd need to be a great programmer. A lot of that now has been abstracted away so that you can focus on your application development. Okay, so jQuery, it's relatively easy to learn. I would say it's a little easier to learn than raw JavaScript, right? So going in, you should have some knowledge. You should know about HTML and CSS, which we do, right? We know about HTML and CSS pretty well. We're getting to be experts in HTML and CSS. Now, it's, you know, before I use jQuery, Ideally, you should know a lot about JavaScript, but it is possible to get away with using jQuery, and just being familiar with JavaScript like you guys are. Okay, so what does it allow us to do? So it allows us, again, it's a level of abstraction. So it allows us to basically write less code and do more with that less code, right? So it take a lot of the common things that you would do with JavaScript that are really complex, would require a lot of code. jQuery abstracts that away from you. So it wraps their methods so that you can call multiple methods really with just a single line of code, and it makes it just a lot easier. So what can jQuery do? These are some of the things that jQuery can do. So one of the most important things that allows us to do is HTML or DOM manipulation. So if you think back to when we were learning about HTML, remember that the document object model is the structure of your HTML document, right? So you can, using jQuery, you can go in and manipulate your HTML programmatically. So for example, when you click on a button, maybe some HTML appears, or when you mouse over something, maybe an item disappears. We can also, so not only can we manipulate the HTML, so we can actually change the structure of our page, we can also manipulate CSS. So we could change dynamically, we can change the style of things on our page. So we've already seen a little bit of this with CSS. So you remember when we hovered over the links, it would change the CSS. So we did that purely with CSS, but now we can use jQuery to do that, and we can make it a little more interactive. We can do a little bit more with it, right? So related to that manipulation is so I haven't really talked a lot about events in HTML, but events are things that happen in your web page that are initiated. So when the page loads, that's an event. So that means you can assign blocks of code to run when these events occur. So so when the page loads, or when the window closes, or so those are sort of automated things, or when when the mouse is pressed, or when a key is pressed. Those are all quote unquote events, and you can attach actions to those events. So when you click something, when you double click something, when something is focused on, when something loses focus on, we can make things happen when those events happen. Okay. Another pretty neat thing that we can do, so it makes effects and animation really easy. So we can do things like transitions, and we can make things fade in and out, and we can hide things, and jQuery makes that really, really easy to do. Another thing we can do, which we're not going to get into because it's a little too advanced, is jQuery allows for easy access to AJAX. Okay, so AJAX allows us to speak to a server. So it allows us to get information from a server and inject that information into a web page without refreshing the entire page. So this becomes very, very helpful. But this is an advanced topic, because we're not going to talk about server-side technology at all in this course. That's for the next course, advanced web programming. And so sort of the key aspect of AJAX is that you're communicating with a server. The server is returning its response, but the web page is not refreshing, and that just allows for a better user experience, right? It's really annoying when an entire page, you make one little change, or let's say you fill out a form and then the whole thing goes away, right? What you want is to try and replicate the desktop experience. Okay, so we don't want the entire page to refresh. We just want little elements to refresh. Okay, so what are some of the benefits of using jQuery? So basically it's shorter code, which means it's going to be easier to read, and so that means it's going to be easier to fix and debug, right? If there's less code for you to look through, then it'll be easier for you to find errors. Remember, we were talking about how coding is like a game of Where's Waldo, right? In that book where you look for Waldo. Well, if the people that are all around, if there's less of them, then finding Waldo is going to be a lot easier, right? So, and another big thing, another big benefit of jQuery is it allows support across major browsers. So remember in the beginning of when I first started this course, I said, web technology can be pretty annoying because your code is going to be viewed on who knows how many browsers, 4 or 5 browsers, and then there are 3 or 4 different operating systems, and then so that's 3 or 4 times 5. So right there, those are 20 different environments that you have to make sure your code works in. So, and JavaScript, for example, is one of those things that doesn't work exactly the same across all browsers, especially older browsers. Older versions of Internet Explorer are really terrible about following, rules about how JavaScript is supposed to work. Because remember, JavaScript is interpreted by your browser. So each browser may interpret it in a slightly different way. But what the smart people at jQuery have done is they have embedded those fixes into the jQuery library so that you don't have to deal with that. If you use jQuery, you don't have to consider all those browsers now. jQuery just kind of takes care of it for you, right? So it abstracts away those things because, again, you want to focus on your application development. You don't want to be spending time looking through your code, figuring out, okay, why isn't this working for Internet Explorer? And then looking online for some fix, some hack, and then you'd have to create an if statement saying, if the browser is Internet Explorer, do it this way. If it's another browser, do it this way. And that takes you away from your application development. That doesn't further your application. That just makes it work, right? So you don't want to be spending time on that stuff because it's a waste. People, let's say if you're building stuff for a client, they don't know that stuff's going on underneath. They think that's they don't understand why isn't the functionality being furthered? Well, it's because you're spending all this time working on the nuts and bolts when you're not really advancing the application. Okay, so whenever you have a chance to use these layers of abstraction, it's usually a pretty good idea. So again, but one of the things you lose when you abstract things away is control over the details, and so that's up to you to decide if you need that control. And of course, jQuery doesn't prevent you from using raw JavaScript, right? It gives you the ability to use it, but you can still use all of the lower level stuff that we've been looking at in JavaScript, and you'll still need to use it regardless. You'll still need to use if statements and loops and variables and all these things. Okay, so that's just a quick introduction to jQuery. So the first thing that we need to do in order to use jQuery, so first let's just create a new folder here. Okay, so this is going to be our jQuery example. Okay, and actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop the video and we'll do the video in sections just so if there's something wrong I won't lose a whole 2 hours lecture. So I'm going to stop the video and we will restart with our demo.